Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you, Karen. And we are recording this meeting, so that will be distributed to you after the meeting, and you can feel free to share that around. I'll also be taking notes, so if you guys just want to sit here and listen and fully engage with Rose, I'll send my notes around after as well. But with that, I think I'll hand it over to Rose to take it away.
Well, thanks, guys. What I thought we would do today is basically I'll share my screen so that we can walk through the request for proposals together. And basically I'll start highlighting things that I, as a grant writer, would pick out and say, okay, this is important, be paying attention to this, so that by the end of today, you'll have a good sense of what this grant is about, how you can apply, what you would need to do to make your application competitive. And through walking through the RFR, we'll also then actually link to the application so that we can walk through the application. The nice thing that we discovered is that the application, there's a link to it right in the RFR, so you don't actually have to be an expert on combis for this particular grant. You'll just be able to go right to the application, fill out the questions, press the upload button for any attachments, and then actually press submit. So it looks like that should be a nice straightforward thing. So I'll go ahead and share the RFR so that we can walk through it. What I've done is I've highlighted things, and I'll be pretty much talking about the highlighted components. And if you have questions, I think it's really great for folks to pipe up and ask questions. If you also have thoughts or contributions to add, feel free to pipe those up too, because everybody's input is going to be very valuable. It's a big grant. There's a lot of funds in it. There's also a pretty strong application rate. And we looked at last year's applicants. I think we found that there was like 1,300 applicants and only about 25% of the projects got funded. So it's a really competitive application. My expectation would be that it's going to be as competitive this year. So just bearing that in mind, it's going to be important to really pay attention to what are they trying to fund and how to make your application as competitive as possible. So in looking at what this grant is trying to fund, you're always trying to say, how does your project relate to what the funder's goals are? You guys are running businesses. Your businesses have your own goals. And the thing with grants are the funders like whatever your project is to align with their goals. We don't necessarily want you to be restructuring your business to align with some funders' random grant goals. But if we can find opportunities where they align and or how you can make your project align to support what the funder is looking for, it's a great opportunity to throw your hat in the ring and see if you might actually get funded. So with that said, what these folks are really looking to do, what the state is looking to do with this money, is talk about how to support the food supply such that we're alleviating distribution issues, and we're supporting folks having access to food, especially local food. We're also looking at food equity. So those are going to be consistent throughout this application. You'll see it highlighted several times. And as you're thinking about your projects, you want to be thinking about how does your project fit into the greater picture of Massachusetts and alleviating or supporting Massachusetts food resiliency in terms of supporting distribution efforts, mitigating issues with food shortages, and supporting food insecurity to food insecure populations or marginalized populations. And again, that's why I said they say it again here. They say it in different ways. In this sentence, they're saying strengthening the resiliency of the food system. So those are going to be key focus points for your project. We don't want to just know that you want to buy a delivery van. We want to know why you want a delivery van and how that's going to support improving the distribution system in Massachusetts, and how that's going to support getting food to insecure populations in Massachusetts. That would make that application score well. A key thing to think about is that your project must be able to be completed by June 30th of 2022. When the grants are as competitive as this particular grant is, the funders are going to throw in all sorts of quick and easy ways to kick applications out. So the first thing you need to be able to do is stick to very basic guidelines. If they say that the project needs to end by June 30th, make sure that in your application, you demonstrate that your project can end by June 30th. They also make note of when the applications are expected to start, and I believe that's further down. And in this particular case, I believe they say projects should not start prior to November. So again, when you're looking at the timeline for your project, be cognizant of saying it's not starting till November and it's definitely ending by June. The projects are being sought from farmers, and one of the things that we noticed, Shannon, Karen, and I went through the applications, a significant portion of the applications were actually going to other entities within the food system. There was a lot of school systems, for example, that have potentially an easier time writing grants for this particular grant fund because of the fact that they're dealing more with food insecurity issues than your business might be dealing with. And so again, as much as you understand that you're competing with those applicants and they have a stronger tie to this potential grant fund, then just making your grant as strong as possible based on how you're dealing with equitable access to food and getting your food distributed within the Commonwealth, that's going to help. So here's where we're going to actually go to the grant, but for now we'll just keep walking through our little highlights. The budget, this is really important. I highlighted these two because it's very interesting, as we'll see further down in the RFR. So the projects are fairly significant. They're up to $500,000 per project. Of the 300 or so that were funded last year, I think only 6 of them, 5 to 6 of them actually received the full 500,000. It's a grant in which you might actually get your full request, and or they might offer you a portion of your request. And so there was a lot more projects that were funded to smaller levels. So while you can get up to 500,000, those were a very small minority of the total grants funded. And to that end, they state that the program does not have a match requirement, which is pretty sweet. Most grants do require some form of match. However, further down in the RFR, you will notice that if you apply for 100,000 or more, they expect you to have match. So they're giving themselves leeway to pick a project that doesn't have match, but with the amount of competitiveness for this grant, it's more likely than not that anything that helps them kick you out of the pile, they're going to kick you out of the pile. So if they mention, and they mentioned it a couple times, have match. If you're over 100, I would definitely try to make sure that you have some form of match if you're applying for that larger volume of funds. And we'll scoot. Eligible projects, again, we're really focusing on production and distribution within the food system. So projects that are related to food production, food sourcing, food packaging, transportation, and distribution. And on that note, we'll find further down, but within those eligible projects, the eligible funding is limited to capital infrastructure. So that's also kind of nice about this particular grant. Oftentimes we have grants that fund operating capital, but this one actually funds physical things, but it only funds physical things. It will not fund non-physical things. So it will not fund a marketing campaign. It will not fund labor. It will not fund contractors, but it will fund buying a truck. It will fund construction of something. So when you're looking at your projects, if they're related to food production, sourcing, packaging, transportation, and distribution, it will buy the packager. It will not buy the packaging. And that's very important, because you might think packaging, oh, that's going to buy, 2 trailer loads of my plastic milk containers. It won't fund that. It'll fund the filler. So just be very cognizant that you need to be applying for physical assets. And on that note, we'll get further down, but the assets must be new. They will not fund used equipment, and they will not fund used vehicles. So if that was in an application and your application got rejected, you might have had a great application, but if you were actually going to purchase used equipment, which many of us actually purchase used equipment or used vehicles, it'll get kicked out right away. Any questions at the moment? Just double checking, because I'm kind of trucking through.
Yeah, I do have just a quick question. You said that the money would not fund contractors, but that it would fund the construction of infrastructure. So can you clarify with,
Yep.
if you're hiring a contractor to build a greenhouse, for example, would it pay the contractor for their time and labor? Because, typically it's materials and labor. Labor is, a significant chunk of the cost of construction. So would it, just wondering, when you say would not fund contractors, can you just be more specific?
If you're getting a building contractor and it's for the actual build out, we'll double check on the eligible side. You must be using a contractor that's licensed within Massachusetts, and as long as it's for the construction of the physical asset, I believe you'll be able to hire a contractor for build out. Let's just walk through eligible expenses. Renovations and the construction of food processing facilities. That actually would be a good question. It might pay for the lumber and the concrete, and it might not actually pay for the construction builder, but I would double check.
We can do that. This last round did cover the costs of a contractor. But we will double check and get that in writing.
Yeah. Great. Let's see. Is it better to apply for a certain amount of funding? Was one level of funding more likely to receive a grant last time? It was certainly, like I said, out of the 360 or so that were funded, there was only 5 or 6 that were funded to 500. There were a few that were hundreds, the 450-ish range, and then it really kind of dropped off and went fairly small from there on out. We could take a look at that, but my inclination is that given they really did wind up saying to people, we will fund you partially, that it's more a question of what is your project, and if they do wind up slicing and dicing how they divvy up the funds, that you make your project compartmentalized so that if they say, well, we'll give you half of what you asked for, that you can actually still do something with that half of the budget. So I wouldn't say in this particular case that there is it's better to apply for less. I would just say, look at the way that you're structuring your project, knowing that they might only fund partial. Are there parts of it that could still work if you only get a partial funding?
In the chat, Mackenzie says management costs are not covered. For example, your time as the farmer on the project, or if you are, as the farmer, are doing the build out, but separate contracted non-farm hires are eligible.
And that's a good point for two things. What they're saying is you can't pay yourself as the family member with grant funds. However, if there was somebody who was not family, not farm related, you could hire them to do the build out. If you or farm labor is involved, that actually could be considered part of your match. You can do in-kind match, which is wonderful. And what you would want to do if you're going to be able to, if you're going to include the in-kind time that you or some of your staff might be putting into the project, is just coming up with a way of justifying what your salary or hourly rates are. So especially if you're a farmer who's on owner's draw or who doesn't take a regular salary, what I would just recommend to folks is that you go to the internet and do a quick search that says like farm manager salary in Massachusetts. And I actually did that today, and it popped up that it's about, the average is about 56,000 at the moment. And then what you could do is cite that. So take a snapshot of that and include it as part of your documentation, saying, okay, 25% of my time this year is going to be focused on this project. Therefore, I'm budgeting my contribution at about $15,000 worth of my time, based on the fact that the average Massachusetts farm manager salary, if I was actually getting paid, is about 60 grand. So no, you guys are not able to include yourselves in actually requested money from the grant, but yes, you can include yourselves as part of your match, which you don't need to do if you're under 100,000, but if you're over 100,000, definitely be considering what you're going to put forth as match. Okay, so let's see.
Before we jump on, there is a question in the chat. Is it better to apply for a certain amount of funding? Was one level of funding more likely to receive a grant last time?
Yeah, we sort of touched on that. And the answer was, if you do go for the big kahuna, there was really only 4 or 5 to 6 that actually got funded to the full amount. There was probably another 4 that got funded in the 400,000 range. And then everybody else is below that. So just be expecting that there's out of the 300 or so that were funded, most were funded to much lower levels. But that doesn't mean don't apply for the big money if that's what your project is. And that's where it's really important to understand what your project is and be couching it based on your project and not on what the grant is funding. And that's where, if you do try to break your project down into little projects within the project, so that if you don't get funded to the full amount, they're not going to kick you out for asking too much. But what they'll wind up doing is saying, oh, well, you asked for 100,000, we'll give you 25. And sometimes that's not helpful. You're like, well, I really needed the 100. So if you can actually make your project into various little projects, and if they do come back and say, well, we only have 25 for you, you could say, oh, that's still useful.
One follow-up on that, Rose. So you mentioned that a match is all but required, strongly suggested for over $100,000 requests. Does it strengthen the application to list a match if it is under $100,000?
I think it would certainly strengthen it. Anytime that they see there's more skin in the game, the funders appreciate that. And we're actually going to talk about that, because one of the criteria that they're scoring you on is also on collaboration. So if you can also show that you're either putting in funds or time, that's going to be beneficial. But certainly it's definitely something to include for the over 100. Okay, so again, here we go. We're looking at strengthening resilience and distribution, food production, sourcing, packaging, transportation, distribution, the physical assets related to those things. And again, as you're preparing your responses, be thinking about how is this project going to support greater access to fresh local food and address system inequities within Massachusetts. What we noticed as well was that when they picked the projects, they basically, the public record shows one sentence associated with each project, and the projects that were funded all within their one sentence highlighted what they wanted the money for and how that was going to help Massachusetts. And so one of the things that Karen, Shannon, and I keyed in on is you really want to boil your project down to one sentence, whether you want to buy a delivery van or whether you need a new food sorter, but you need to tie that to how it's going to help the local population or access, food access or food insecurity. It doesn't have to be a big sentence. It doesn't have to tie it down into nuts and bolts. It just has to say it. Like, this is going to help my products get to this community, or this is going to help me expand services to Massachusetts, or through this piece of equipment, I will be able to produce more stuff to feed Massachusetts. But it's really got to state something like that, because that's the one line that all of the people in the state are going to be seeing, and they're going to know how that's being tied to how these monies are being spent. And what we did see was that for all of the applicants who really just said, I need a new food sorter or I need a new van, but they didn't tie it to how it was going to help food insecurity or food access in Massachusetts, those were the grants that didn't get funded. Okay. Projects that support immediate and long-term needs of the local food system. So again, the big physical things of storage, processing, delivery equipment, facility adaptations, renovations, information technology needs. So Shannon and I were talking about that. Like, for example, if you need computers, hardware, physical asset things, point of sale systems, but they actually need to be physical systems. And then other strategies, including multi-sector collaborations that connect local food production with food insecure communities. But again, within those strategies, they're talking about they will help buy the capital infrastructure required to support whatever that strategy is. So, and again, that's a nice thing. The fact that they're funding capital things is great. The caveat being they have to be new, but those are just things to be aware of. Okay, for your budgets, this is another thing. In order to make sure that you don't get kicked out just on the top, you have to include quotes. So for whatever you're asking for, you need to get a quote. Whether you're trying to buy a forklift, you need to go get a quote for the forklift that you're intending to purchase and who you're intending to purchase it from. If you're going to be building your greenhouse and you're going to hire contractors, you need to actually have a quote from the contractor demonstrating what it's going to cost. These particular funders, I find with different grants, the level of how much documentation you need prior to funding varies very greatly. And these guys in particular are very strong on making sure you know exactly what your project's going to cost. And we'll get into this in a minute, that you also know exactly how you're going to pay for it before you get the grant. This is one of the more stringent applications I've seen where they're really stressing that right up front. You've got to provide your quotes and you've got to tell us how you're going to pay for your grant before you get reimbursed. And again, if you add line items and you don't add quotes, those are going to get thrown out. So your entire grant application might get thrown out, and or they might only fund you for the things where you actually did include quotes. And here's another kicker, and this happens all the time. So sometimes funders take a while to review all the grants and then actually make decisions on to who gets funded. And yet the deadline doesn't change. So right now the deadline is June 30th, but depending on how long it takes them to review grants and such, that's why they're suggesting you don't have a start date before November. But if you happen to get started on your project before you've received your grant award, any of those costs are no longer going to be eligible for grant reimbursement. So feel free to get started. Just know that you'll actually have less project money that you can ask for from the grant if you do get started ahead of time. When you're looking, this was one that I wanted to point out. These are the prohibited expenditures. And this is where I said, like, they've actually got a lot of things. And it turns out when you look at what is allowable, it's really focused on infrastructure and capital assets. But costs associated with marketing materials, signage, vehicle graphics. So even if you ask for a truck, you can only ask for the truck. You cannot ask for the truck and for the truck to be wrapped. So that just, again, important to note. And this one kind of, it stood out to me because I know a lot of people, like if you're going to go buy a filler, you also want to buy the yogurt cups to go with the filler. They won't cover any of the actual packaging materials. They'll just cover the equipment to produce the package. And they also will not cover real estate. So we did have some folks last year that actually applied to purchase land, and those will get kicked out this year. They will not fund real estate. And here's where we get that sentence. This is the first one where I noticed it, where they say, if you're going to ask for more than 100,000, we will be focused on those that offer match. And given how competitive this application was, definitely expect that the only ones that are going to get funded to 100% are going to be those with match, unless they have a ridiculously compelling application. So you want to talk about, again, how you're going to improve, strengthen the resiliency of the food system. And these are key words for them. So feel free to use their key words in your own application. Kind of just regurgitate what they're saying, but be able to actually demonstrate how your project is going to do those things. So how are you going to be leveraging the equipment that you're sourcing from this grant to support gaining more markets in Massachusetts, or getting into more food insecure communities, or partnering with local food systems or local school systems to be supporting the food inequity, food insecurity concerns. And that's where the project itself might be, I'm buying a potato harvester, but then you can demonstrate in the collaboration that once I have this potato harvester, I'm going to be working with 3 local school systems to get potatoes into the local schools. And all of a sudden, that part of the project just demonstrates, okay, now we know how buying a potato harvester is tying into the local food access. Also, and I think Shannon's going to be able to show you guys, they are going to give extra consideration to folks who tie the grant application to the Massachusetts Local Food Action Plan, which is this right here. And it's a big thing, but I think Shannon is going to boil it down to a few bullets that you can pull from. And basically, if you can tie, the bullets are pretty broad, so you should be able to tie your projects to them fairly easily, that you can then gain extra points for that. So I'm going to stop again and just see if there's any other questions. One caveat on the paying for off-farm labor. Labor contractors need to be licensed within Massachusetts. Yes, absolutely. Again, they're really focused on this is Massachusetts money. It needs to stay within Massachusetts, and it needs to benefit Massachusetts on all fronts, the communities it's serving and the contractors it's employing. Would needing a new cooler for storage to provide better quality and longer lasting produce be connected to what we just covered? So if the cooler would provide better quality, at this point, the question then would be quality. If you actually say it's going to provide better nutritious, the nutritious would probably be a key word. So if you say, I'm not only providing local food, but my local food is actually going to be more nutritious because it's staying better, and and how is it getting to the local population? But yes, if the new cooler can support more access to the local population, and that the local population, especially if the local population is one of these sort of food insecure populations, or a population that has food inequities, that would definitely be something to highlight. But just a new cooler isn't going to help. And if you wanted to strengthen the argument, you could explain how much, because quantifying the benefit is actually going to be very important as part of the evaluation criteria. So if you can say that the new cooler is going to improve perishability by 25%, so if you've got, I don't know how many boxes of spinach, for example, are in the cooler that are going bad, and you can say, I'm going to improve that by 25% and translate that into pounds of spinach that is now going to be available for the community, that would be a really strong argument. And again, tying it to the fact that it's actually staying in the community, that it's not then just being shipped out to one of your wholesalers and it makes it into Connecticut.
And Chuck has a question. Did it seem like there was a ratio of funding to gross business income that had a better chance of funding? It was all over the place. I saw multi-million-dollar organizations with Massachusetts presence. I mean, significant Massachusetts presence get funding. And I also saw really small farms get funding. You know, small food pantries. I know Falmouth got $5,000 to build raised beds for handicap accessible gardens. So I don't know. I mean, I think it was really project dependent more than the size of the business. I don't know if Kelly or Mackenzie have any other input on that. You can add it to the chat if you want.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I would agree. I did not see that as one of the strengths, and we're about to walk through the evaluation criteria now. That did not come up at all as part of the evaluation criteria. I think that's just helping them understand the size of who's applying for the grants, but I don't think that's part of how they're selecting who's getting funding.
Okay, so Chuck modified his question, and thanks, that does help clarify it. Does it seem like smaller businesses had a better chance if they asked for a small amount?
That's a better way of asking that question. And certainly if you generate 50,000 in gross sales a year and you ask for a $500,000 project, they're going to want to understand, and we're going to talk about it right here in the evaluation criteria, you have to demonstrate the economic impact. So if they're going to be investing 500,000 in your business and you're currently only at 50,000 in annual sales, then you most likely better be demonstrating how you're about to just grow by a significant bazillion amount in order for that investment to make sense. So they're certainly going to look at the size of the request to, is that business, does it make sense for that business? Because the last thing that funders want to do is give folks money that that just winds up not being very well utilized.
One hopes.
One hopes.
There were a couple projects that I was a little surprised to see got funding based on what I understood the size of their business to be.
Yeah, and actually people can write really good applications, and if there's only one question that asks about your gross income, if they kind of skipped over that and the rest of it looks good. So it's a question of if people are putting the two together when they're considering your application. But certainly when you explain your economic impact, And it's not to say that just because you're at 50,000 now, with that 500,000 investment, you won't get to $1 million in sales in 5 years. Who knows? But it's up to you to argue that case and make that case. Which, one of the things that we did want to point out, it is a statewide grant, so we expect that they will want applicants and awardees to represent the state. So we do expect that it's not going to be all like one county or one region, that we technically should see funding sprinkled throughout the state. So just be thinking of that, that basically everybody should consider applying in terms of from a regional perspective. We will walk through the evaluation criteria. So again, if you're over 100,000, try to think of how you're going to come up with some match. And then there's 7 bullets that are basically how they're considering scoring your application. The first bullet is, how strong is your project in relation to impacting the Commonwealth food system? So again, you really want to describe how your project is going to improve, strengthen the resiliency of the Massachusetts food system. So when we talked about the cooler being able to improve your perishability by X%, and you could be saying, we are increasing the Massachusetts ability to provide food for our own population by X% through this project, that's a good tie-in to this particular bullet. And then if you can further tie it into the local food action plan, cite a second thing, you'll be really well done on that bullet. The second bullet is, can you demonstrate how your project is addressing food insecurity? So alleviating people who may not have access to food or who may not have the funds to purchase food. What is this project going to be able to do to support marginalized populations having access to your locally grown food? That might not be something, you might have to be a bit creative, because as a business, you might not be able to support giving your food away, or giving your food away at reduced rates, or working through the food system or the school system at price points that don't support what your costs to produce are. Just note that if you can't support that bullet, your application will just be weak in that section. And most grants are never going to score 100% on every section. Every project is going to have some strengths and some weaknesses. And for each applicant, it's understanding where your strengths and weaknesses are and really pumping up the strong parts of your application and understanding and accepting where your weak parts of your application are, and are there ways to bone them up. So if there are ways for this one, I would say definitely think about your partnerships and who your customers are. Who are the customers that come to your farmer's market or your farm stand? Or are you serving retailers, and some of those retailers actually are located in food insecure markets? Are you working with school systems and your food is actually getting to the lunch population? Are you working with some of the senior citizens, senior centers, and are you doing Meals on Wheels? Like, where is your product going? And most likely you'll be able to come up with some part of who your buyers are or who their customer base is that you could tie to the food insecurity bullet. You just have to think about it and make a point of doing that. So then the third bullet, again, it's all based on these really key food insecurity and food equity concerns. How is the project going to support equitable access to food, particularly healthy food? And that's where that thought of, if your perishability is supporting improved nutrition of your product, so it's losing fewer vitamins because it's staying a bit fresher, those would be important things to point out. This one I thought was really interesting is also if you have any culturally relevant food. So if you're growing vegetables that are primarily of interest to a certain population, that would be something to highlight. If you're making value-added food products that are going to be of a specific ethnic origin, that would be something to highlight, because what they're really trying to say is, how are you supporting communities that don't necessarily have their needs or interests met right now with the basic food system as we know it. On that line, and this is also important, we don't necessarily all pump our own tires, and it's kind of a hard thing to do. But if you do happen to be BIPOC, urban, minority, or woman-owned, and you are interested in applying for the grant, make sure that you point that out, because you'll get points on equity, which is a key criteria, if you actually do let them know that you are one of those or more of multiple of those criteria. So not only are they looking for, are you serving that community, but are you of that community yourself as a producer? And if so, then they will make a special point of looking at giving you points for that. Here's where we start to talk economic need and impact. So this is where you really want to be able to quantify the benefits to your project. So what are the outcomes going to be? How much improved food are you going to get from the increased shelf life with the cooler example? If you did get a distribution vehicle, how many more homes are you going to be able to service, or markets are you going to be able to service? If you just say, I want a new delivery vehicle, but you don't intend to expand and you don't intend to increase production, and you're not demonstrating how you're already serving marginalized, food insecure, food system population, you're not going to score very well. So you need to demonstrate how this new investment is going to enable you to increase how you're serving the population, unless you were to say, well, my current van is about to die and I'm actually going to have no route. So then you would say, well, this is going to enable me to continue serving these 500 customers that I'm already serving. But you really need to document and quantify the benefit or the negative impact that would happen if you don't get the project. Does that make sense to people? Feasibility of the action plan. So they really want to make sure that people are ready to, the minute they say go, you've got the money, that you're able to use the money. So they want you, that's why they're really big about having you provide the quotes up front, that you've got your contractors lined up or the item you want to buy lined up, because they want to make sure that the project is complete, the funds are expended by the end of June. And they also really want you to describe to them, because it's a reimbursement grant, they want you to describe to them how you know you're going to be able to pay for the items, because it's large capital outlay, how you know that you're going to be able to pay for that item until you get your reimbursement check.
So let me just jump in here, that that type of question, we can connect farmers to resources, whether or not it's Farm Credit East. I know that he didn't join the call, but First Citizens Credit Union is considering that, and the Mass Food Trust has also offered bridge grants. And yeah, Farm Credit East, First Citizens, and the Food Trust have all done those. There might be other options out there as well that we can help explore.
Yeah, so the wonderful thing about the networks that Karen was just describing is that you actually have a bunch of folks that are willing to offer bridge loans. Bridge loans are slightly harder to come by nowadays, especially when they're related to grants, and the grants aren't a given that you're going to get them. But if you can get a bridge loan, if that's what you need for the capital purchase, or if you were to demonstrate through your balance sheet, we've got this much in savings, it's going to come from savings, or here's how much net income we're generating on a monthly basis, and the net income is going to be able to cover the debt service or what have you. You just need to demonstrate what is your plan. And if it is a bridge loan, you actually need to show that letter of commitment or that paperwork. And that's where Karen can connect you with some financial institutions that are actually excited to partner with you on that.
It's quite, Pioneer Valley grows too. PV grows might also be an option. We're going to double check on whether or not they land this far east in the state, but certainly if you're in Central Mass or Western Mass, those are options. That is an option for you as well.
If you also, if you do already operate with a line of credit and you haven't used your line of credit, for example, most veggie growers, their line of credits will likely be paid off by this fall because that's when you're flush with cash. If you can show that your line of credit has the money in it to cover the expenditure, that would be good too. Again, showing the bank statement, showing your line of credit, or working to secure paperwork demonstrating a bridge loan, so that you demonstrate we do have a plan for how we're going to pay for this until we get reimbursed. And similarly, if you are going to do that 100K or more, describe what you're planning to offer for your matching contributions. So the sustainability and scalability, there's two more bullets. Sustainability and scalability is one. So they want to know, how is this project going to be supported beyond this initial investment? So that's where, like, if you're a $50,000 business, and this is my big kitty cat, and you're asking for a $500,000 project, how do you anticipate getting to the size of income needed to support a $500,000 investment? So what is your plan for how this is going to help you long term, and how you're going to be able to continue to, if this piece of machinery requires more staffing to operate, what's your operating plan to show that you've actually got the staff on hand, that you've got the operating plan to make this thing functional? Because what they don't want to do is invest a bunch of money in pieces of equipment that are just going to sit there because you can't pay the electricity bill. And we have this with cheese businesses all the time. So I was actually working with a cheese business just now. We actually got a grant to get them a smaller vat pasteurizer because the vat pasteurizer they had was too big. And they needed to make astronomical batches of cheese to actually use the vat pasteurizer because their reader stick that goes into the pasteurizer was too short. So we needed to actually downsize their vat to a smaller amount so that they could make smaller but more frequent batches. That's exactly what this question is going at, is if you're getting bigger equipment, can you demonstrate that you can operate it beyond just us buying it for you? The second component of that question is your application will score better if you can demonstrate that your project could be replicated, scaled, or could be potentially beneficial to other businesses. So I think that one in particular, it's more like food system projects, like if the school's local food program demonstrated a model for aggregating and distributing local food, that model could be replicated elsewhere. But even in your own business, if you could demonstrate that, well, if we buy this van and this van services these communities, then we buy a second van and we could service these communities. So demonstrating how the return on investment of one van based on a certain population base, there's 3 other population bases that you could eventually then target and grow your business in that way. So demonstrating, if possible, that your project has scalability to it would be helpful. And if it makes sense to demonstrate how other people could replicate your model, I do know of another cheese producer who is looking at trying to build his model. Was he wanted to be a creamery sourcing milk from 5 local farms, and he wanted to be a model that other cheesemakers could then replicate. So he wasn't really worried about competition. He was more excited to say, every community should have a little local cheesemaker supporting 5 farms, and this is how you can use my model. Most private businesses wouldn't be that excited to share their model, but it's an example that sometimes you can even find ways to show how you could be a model. The last bullet, and this is, I think, where a lot of you guys could score high and probably overlooked it when you wrote prior applications, is they are going to score you on collaboration. And so you might think, okay, well, if all I need is a cooler, who am I collaborating with? Leverage the fact that, for example, you're getting technical assistance from CMAP. They've been providing you with some business planning for how that cooler fits into your overall plan. Getting letters of recommendation or letters of support from your buyers, from, if you do work with local foods, from Shannon and Karen. Anything you can do to show that you're not just your own isolated little business, but that you are integrated into the community, and that the community thinks that this investment is a good investment, is going to strengthen your application. I'll take a look at the chat and then we'll pop into the application. Oh yes, so the Carrot project could also be a bridge loan option, and the Co-op Fund of New England for co-ops. So if you're a co-op. All right, so with that, I think I'm just gonna double check. Okay, here's the eligible expenses, and this is where we said it's equipment. And the key is just explaining how your equipment addresses their concerns. So, and then the budget. So you would explain what the item is, what it's going to do, how many of them, estimated hours, if it's hours that you're going to be getting contract labor for, the hourly rate, and the total. Option 2, negotiate the budget for. So this would be if you've got quotes for the item, you would put it in. And again, if the item is a consultant or a contractor, do the rates, tally it up, and then we'll get into attaching the projects. So now I'm going to move you guys over so I can get to my scroll bar. And we will actually hop into the application. Okay, so if everybody goes to the RFR, if you've got the RFR, the nice, easy way to actually get to the application itself is to scootle on to page 2 and click this blue button. It says submit responses to online application. The mass.gov service details food security infrastructure grant program. If you just hover over it, you'll see a little finger button come up and you click on it. And I'm gonna stop. I don't know if my screen changed for you or not. So I'm gonna stop my share and then reshare where the button went. Okay, so now we're in the grant. And once you're on the grant website page, you'll see it says Food Security Infrastructure Grant Program. And then the third link down, apply for the FY22 Food Security Infrastructure Grant. You click on that, and then you're going to get started. So we say start, press the start button, and anything that has a red star next to it means you actually have to fill that out or your grant gets kicked out. So first name, last name of the person, the business name, the project manager name. This is most likely going to be you, but in case there's somebody different, we did have, for example, an orchard apply and the business owner was the applicant, but he had an orchard manager who was the project manager. So if you do have somebody that's going to be in charge of your grant and it's not you, make sure that that person is listed here. Legal structure, it's a drop down. You pick what your legal structure is, your address, and it's the address that you would use for your tax purposes. So make sure that it appears if you were doing a W-9, your legal income tax related address. The county that you're in, and again, we think that they're probably interested in what county because they want to make sure that funds probably do get distributed fairly ubiquitously across the state, which is nice to know too. The business address, the business county is different from the home county, phone, email, website, and project title. Project title, again, try to have something in your title that links to the food system in Massachusetts. So we're, Chamberlain Farm cooler to reduce perishability of Massachusetts farm stand food. Something that links to the local population and what the grant is actually funding. Here's your request amount, your annual gross sales, describe your proposed project, and that's where you really want to explain what it is that you're doing and then how that's going to support the food system, food insecurity, food inequities in the state.
Okay, one thing about as you're going through this, don't work in this document. Work in a separate Word document, text document, just because it's hard to know what you've submitted after you submit it. Also, if you want to look at formatting, the lower right-hand corner where there are those 3 bars, Rose, if you want to grab and pull that, you can actually make that bigger so you can actually see all the text that you've copied and pasted into that section. But it's best to work outside of the actual application and answer the question and then copy and paste the response in.
And I'll actually show you guys, I'll stop my share for a moment and show you. So what I did, because that's exactly right, you want to be doing your draft on your computer and then you can copy and paste your responses. So I went and I downloaded that grant. And then what I did was I said, now I've got a PDF. So it's exactly the same thing, but it's a PDF that I can now say, edit the document and work within the PDF. And I'll get out of that and I'll show you guys how to do that on the computer. So we are in the grant, food security grant. So if you go up to the top here, I think, well, so I'll do it. I'll show you how I'm doing it from my internet browser, but I would just say print and just try to print the application. Can you see that it's saying print the application?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So if you did that, that way you'd have it on your computer and you could just be using that. And then when you're ready, go to the actual site and do it. Upload your questions and upload your answers in here. But that's a really good point because you might wind up hitting submit and then be like, oh, darn it. Oftentimes when you're applying for a grant online, it won't save what you did. So it's gone and you won't remember what your project was. You won't remember what you put as your budget or what you sent as attachments. So it's really helpful to have your own hard copy to remember what you asked for, what you said you were going to do. And also, if your grant gets funded, you'll know what a successful application looks like. And if your grant didn't get funded and you ask them what you could do to improve it next time, you'll actually have your old grant to refer back to say, oh yeah, I could have worded this differently. Where in Massachusetts will the project take place? What sector is your organization part of? So if you're a farm or a distributor, again, it's a drop down. and what role does your organization play? Provide an estimate of how many people your organization serves on a monthly basis. This is a good question that I think a lot of you might not know. Like, I don't know how many customers I have, especially if you sell to stores or the food goes into the wholesale system or it goes to schools. What you want to try to do is, as best possible, get some sort of an estimate. So if you know you work with 3 school districts and you know how many kids are in the school, you could basically say, well, I know that, 500 students are eating 1 meal a day that has my food in it. If you're working with retailers, you could get a sense based on how many retailers you're servicing, what is and perhaps it's from your own farm stand, you could say, okay, well, the average sales transaction at my farm stand is $7. So if I know that I'm selling $70 worth of stuff to a particular store, if I were to think about what the retail price for that product would be and divide that by my $7 farm stand average transaction, that's how many customers that store is likely serving of my product. So try to find some way to calculate on average how many people you're reaching. Does that make sense?
Question in the chat about that, Rose. So would you show your justification for the number of people served within that response there?
In this case, because it's a box that's not wiggly, like you can't expand it, I would just say no. If they question you, they'll come and ask you. And that's where it's important to have your math for how you arrived at that. So you're going to make a best case guess as to the number of customers that your product reaches. And then if they ask you, oh, well, how did you arrive at that? Then you'll be able to tell them, but you're not going to justify it in that particular box. And interestingly enough, that might be why some of those larger organizations potentially scored well, just because if you're a large organization who has a lot of customers and they didn't specifically say Massachusetts people does your organization service, they could be potentially demonstrating a large outreach. But just as much as you can, try to focus on how many people do you think, how many consumers do you think are actively accessing your product? And then again, tell them how the folks are getting access to your products and what counties you're in. Briefly describe your enterprise or organization, your place in the food system, and again, how you are going to support food insecurity and equitable access to food. And it might not be something that's part of your mission statement. If it is already part of your mission statement, great, it's already there. If it's not, just be thinking about how in this particular project's case, are you going to be supporting more access to local food, potentially how more food insecure populations can gain access to your food through your project. And a lot of these questions, and this happens with grants all the time, there's going to be a lot of repetition. Don't feel bad about repeating the same thing. If you feel you've already answered it, you put the same thing in the same in the response. You might tweak a couple words, but honestly, a lot of grants are just repetition, repetition, repetition. So how will your project help connect the local food production distribution system to communities and residents facing food insecurity to help alleviate both immediate and long-term needs? Do you accept SNAP? And how will your project increase equitable access to local food to residents in the Commonwealth who've historically experienced food insecurity, particularly communities of color, low-income communities, gateway cities, and environmental justice neighborhoods? And again, just try to think about whether you service those or whether distributors or retailers that you work with or school systems that you work with are working within neighborhoods or working with populations that meet this question. And then here's on the producer side, if you are any of these criteria, definitely let them know, because you will score, you will get extra points for that. And here's where certainly if you can get your community to provide letters of support, that would be great. And here's where you want to describe the economic impact and try to explain the economic impact, how it will benefit your project to you as a farmer, but then also how that project will then benefit the state as a whole. So how will improving your perishability by 25% change the food resiliency in the state as a whole? What size of a player are you? And that's where we got into that question earlier of, does the size of the project matter? They were funding some pretty small projects, but they want to understand where you fit into the larger pie. So you don't necessarily have to be impacting on a large scale, but they want to know the quantifiable metrics of how you're impacting. And again, this is one of those questions where it seems very similar. They want you to quantify and demonstrate the economic impact, and then they want you to describe how it will impact food production, sourcing, packaging, transportation, and distribution to strengthen and improve the resiliency of the food system. So you're showing, here's the dollar impact we're going to have, and here's what this project is doing. Through investing in the cooler, we are going to be reducing the perishability of product grown in Massachusetts, and therefore we're actually making product that's been produced in Massachusetts. We're increasing the productivity of the acreage. If you do tie into local food plan, describe which sector goals and which recommendations, and that's pretty nice and tidy. So if improving productivity is part of a goal under agriculture, then you would just find out what goal that relates to. And you can just sort of cite the various goals that it relates to. The project plan is basically very specific. If you're buying a piece of equipment, so who's going to put the order, who's going to service the order, when is it going to be placed, when do you expect it to be received, does any installation need to be done, who's going to do the installation? So they really just want a timeline of what are the things that need to happen, who's going to do them, so who's the responsible party, and when will they be done. And here's the question about telling us how you know that you're going to have the money to pay for the equipment or the items prior to getting reimbursement. And it's basically if you have savings or loans or lines of credit or operating capital, describe that and say that the attachment for the balance sheets or the income statements. If you're going to get a bridge loan, describe that, and then also say see letter of commitment or bridge loan paperwork. And here they're just basically, if you look at your timeline that you put up here, they just want you to state it in days. So it's going to take you 100 days or 20 days or 1 day. How long will it take you from start to finish to actually get your project done? And then
again, remember that there is a contract end date of June 30th. So be careful about saying it's going to take 180 days and they don't award it till after January 1st, which has happened. They've taken a long time to review the projects based on the amount of time. So just consider, you know, be realistic, but also be careful. Now, there have been, it says in the RFR that they expect the awards to be issued by the 30th of November. So we hope that they will do that, but in this past round, it did take a long time to get the reviews done. They did push people to finish by June 30th, but they also did offer the ability to extend, especially in the climate like this where supply chains are really disrupted and things just aren't available. So there are people who at worst, I think every request for an extension was honored, but you really do want to try to get it done by June 30th, or to be really clear with MDR why it's not going to happen, and it should be beyond your control.
I was just trying to find where I'd seen that as well, where they said they expect to have notifications by November, and they actually said you should, put your start date as no earlier than November, but I'm not seeing that anymore.
I saw it actually in the ComBuy's listing originally of 11:30, but I didn't see that part. So we have a question, does it have to be business savings or would personal savings be acceptable? And I think, that's a business decision you need to make. I don't think it matters for MDR or for EEA.
Yeah, they won't care where the funds are coming from, so long as there is funds. That's their big thing, is ensuring that you do have a way. So if you're using your personal savings to cover it, that would be fine for them, but just demonstrating proof that you have those funds available. And then here's the little box where you would talk about how you're going to be able to continue leveraging the value of the equipment or asset, and how you could potentially further scale the project, replicate the project, and if it's possible to be used as a model for other businesses, describe that as well. This is the box that I think definitely you can capitalize upon, because if we're not food system hubs ourselves, we know that the other organizations are going to score strong there. But if you can describe how you are connected to the communities, and how potentially some of the distributors or buyers that you're working with are getting your food to these populations that the state is concerned about, that would be really great to get letters of support for your application and leverage those, because you buying a potato harvester might not mean anything to the local school system, but if they said, oh, well, yes, we actually buy potatoes from you, and that gets into the kids' meals once a week, 52 weeks of the year, then that's really helpful. So being thoughtful about where, and if you have even if it's customers that are coming to your farm stand, if you have customers that would provide letters of support saying that they're coming to your farm stand because you provide good quality and good access to food, that you're making local food available to the population, those will be, especially for the smaller applications, those will go a long way towards demonstrating that the community is relying upon you. And that would be helpful.
We have a question in the chat. Roughly how much would a grant writer charge for a grant like this, assuming the grant request was under $100,000?
Well, so I'm a grant writer, and the first thing I would say is part of the problem with writing grants is that the grant application can be just as robust for a $5,000 grant as for a $500,000 grant. So it actually costs generally the same whether you're applying for a teeny weeny grant or you're applying for a really big grant. And so I often recommend that folks look at the cost benefit, because the problem with applying for the grants is the application, the time that it takes to put the application together. And as you saw, this grant, you can be applying for 5,000 or 500,000, and it's the same series of questions. And the person who's applying for the $500,000 amount isn't necessarily going to be any more verbose than the person who's asking for 5,000. So typically what I would recommend is that the farm try to answer their questions as best possible, and then have a grant writer review and sort of say, okay, now how can you say this to make sure that you're addressing this concern, so that you're utilizing less of the grant writer's time. And on average, I have not written this particular grant, but I would say this is not a super gigantic grant application. I wouldn't think it would cost more than $1,000 to put an application together. So if you're looking, I'll give you an example. If any of you guys have worked on the value-added producer grants, those can run anywhere from, when it takes me the time to prepare them, 3,000 to 10,000, based on the degree of detail, because those require oftentimes a feasibility study attached and a business plan attached, and most of the applicants don't have either. So you're actually writing a feasibility study, and you're writing a business plan, and you're preparing a grant application. In this case, I would just say you could hire a grant writer to review your answers to the big boxes, and it shouldn't take more than a few hours. And that's just my own personal thought.
Yeah, and I will say CMAP, not to take business from anybody, but CMAP is able to review some of this, some of these questions with you to help, talk through some of the tougher questions. We can certainly write letters of support based on a solid draft of the proposal. We wouldn't write them until we'd actually seen what the project is. But we also have at least one person who's willing to review finished projects for finished proposals for, just as a set of eyes for someone who is writing business plans for MDAR already. And we can potentially come up with a list of grant writers who might be able to do this. I know there are a couple in the region who have written to this grant already. So those are all things you can reach out to CMAP about.
Yes, and I'll just clarify, because I think lots of us are joining from different parts of the state, is that CMAP focuses on Norfolk, Plymouth, and Bristol counties. And you can definitely reach out to us if you're out of that range, but we would most likely connect you with a local organization to you, as we are kind of in that 3-county area. And I will also, when I send out the follow-up email for this, I'll share our link to our business assistance program, because we can assist you in future grants as well. And I'm hoping that as we think about wrapping up, that this workshop has been really helpful for you for this grant, but also I hope that some of these strategies will carry over into some of the other grants that you hopefully will try applying for in the future. And there's actually one question in the chat right now that I hope will help us kind of transition into more of a Q&A that I'm hoping to get to. William asks, if we applied last round and were denied funds, would you recommend submitting an entirely different project, or trying to strengthen our previous application and resubmit it if it is still relevant?
And William, I have a question on your question. Have you asked for the feedback on your grant? Because I think that's where your answer lies. If you can fix your grant or rewrite your grant to answer the criticisms in the previous application, then my opinion would be it's to resubmit if you think that you have a strong proposal with those weaknesses answered. but it might be that you can't meet the criteria. You don't think you can as well with a new project. And Rose, certainly if you have an opinion, it's not too late to ask for feedback. So the grant, what is it? I'll put the grant in the email in.
Yep.
So yeah, so you can definitely email the contact email that's in the RFR, but
Yeah.
also they're probably going to direct you to a link to apply for a records request to get your actual score. At this stage, they're not really giving so much feedback via email anymore, but they will be able to get you your actual score sheet. And I'm not sure what the turnaround time is on that, so I would ask right away. And then I would try and get in the habit of asking pretty immediately if you're denied for a grant, so that you can have that and reflect on that before applying for another grant. But yes, it shouldn't be too late to get that score. And I'll send that link as well in the follow-up tomorrow morning.
I'm really glad that came up, because that's one of the things I wanted to make sure we touched on is how the grant system works in general. And as you saw from this particular grant, only 25% of the applicants actually got funded. So there's a lot of good applications that are sitting out there that did not get funding. The first thing you want to do is verify that you actually didn't apply for things that were prohibited, and that you did the basic things that it said to do. Did you submit your quotes? Did you attach the letters of support? And if it wasn't kicked out for basic reasons, like I asked for land and they don't fund land, then it's just a question of how can you strengthen your application and resubmit. There's no reason to throw out the application unless it was asking for something prohibited, in which case, no, don't reapply, change your project. But as long as the request was for something that they would fund, then the question is, what was the issue with your application that limited its ability to score well or score high enough to get funded? And that's where most people get really upset when they don't get a grant, and then they throw in the towel and they don't go back. But again, most grants don't get funded the first time they apply. So what you need to do is you just need to understand that in the grant writing world, you're going to need to resubmit. And so what you want to do is you don't want to have to be every year thinking up new projects. Ultimately, you just want to be doing the same project and just strengthening the application so that in 2 or 3 years, the thing actually gets funded. And the funders actually like that. And if you don't ask them for their feedback, they kind of get grumpy, because part of the funding process is that they don't want you to just take their money. They want you to feel like they're vital and important to you, and that you actually care about them as an organization and not just about their money. You might only care about their money, but they kind of want you to think that you care about them as more than just their money. And so by you asking them, hey, how could I have made my application better? Then they're like, oh, you want my feedback? Okay, great. And it actually means something to them. Like, they want to know that you're taking their input and you're strengthening your application. And they want to see that application come back, and they want to see it come back stronger. So if you just keep trying to reinvent the wheel, you're never actually understanding what was your weakness in the first place. And you're spending a lot of energy coming up with new projects. So I would say, as long as it wasn't for a prohibited expense, absolutely find out what they thought you could have done to improve your application. And as long as it wasn't time sensitive and you can't resubmit, I would say resubmit for the same project. And recognize that it could take up to 2 or 3 times before something actually meets the mark, but it doesn't mean that you should throw in the towel after one application.
So Chuck asks, how long does it typically take for EEA to respond with your grant scoring once you request online? I think it depends on how many requests are ahead of you. When earlier in this process, I think it only took a couple days. I'm not sure where that is now.
And if you don't have a chance to get their feedback, if you do have a copy of what you submitted, use the points that we talked about today and review your own application and do an assessment of, did I hit on these key points and where could I have strengthened my application? Because that's likely what they're going to tell you you were weak on.
So it is 7:30 now, and I noticed some people heading out to make dinner undoubtedly, and that's totally fine, but I did want to just say that so I can stay on the line for a little while longer, and I'm hoping that Rose and Karen can as well, because I feel like there are some more questions out there. But just to wrap up for those of you who have to go, like I said, I've been taking notes, and we have this recording as well. So I'll be sure to send those both in the follow-up email tomorrow, as well as some of the links that have been in the chat. There's also a really important thing to look out for in that email, and that's a survey. And I promise that it's a short one, fewer than 10 questions, and most of them are just a little checkbox. And it's really going to help us as we try and do more workshops like this, as we start to see more grants. We really want to be able to host more workshops like this for you guys, because, you know, farmers have enough things to worry about. We want to help you out with this. So filling out the survey will really help us to improve these workshops and know whether or not you're interested in them going forward. So I really hope you'll take about 5 minutes to fill that out when you see it come across your email tomorrow morning. But you're all more than welcome to stay on the line and ask more questions, but you're also welcome to sign off. I see that we have a hand up, Tish, if you want to go ahead.
We also have another question in the chat too that we need to get to.
Sure.
Yeah, my question, Shannon, is you said that this recording is going to be available. You're going to send the link for that so we can go back and review what we all said. I mean, what was all said.
Yes,
Thank you.
definitely. Of course. Yes, and I would encourage you to share it with your friends as well. We want to get this information to as many farming friends, particularly here in Southeastern Mass, as we can. But yes, there's a question in the chat. Is it likely that there will be a third round of FSIG in 2023? Karen, you might have a better idea about that.
So this money, my understanding, and Kelly and Mackenzie, you might have a better answer, but my understanding is this came from the governor's budget, that there is an interest in doing this longer term, that the demand from the first round showed the need. But I am not 100%, you know, there's no guarantee it's in the next budget. It's going to depend on, you know, state finances. So that's a qualified probably.
Any other questions that folks have, either generally about this application or this grant, or if you want to ask a specific question about a project you have in mind? We have some space for that as well.
While folks are thinking about that, I'll just make 2 notes. When you look at the attached quotes and attached materials, it does mention that it's a requirement that they go in as a single document. That's going to be important. It won't allow you to attach more than one file. If you don't know how to make multiple files into one PDF, call Shannon, and Shannon can help you get your documents into a single PDF. But that's very important, because if you do have 5 or 6 letters of support, you want to make sure that they all get looked at.
Yeah, and I would say I can help with that as well, but please don't all do it on the last day.
Those are the big gotchas I had for this grant. One other thing that had popped up in the conversation with Karen and Shannon earlier today was we did notice that the first list of prohibited expenditures was anything COVID related. So however you're couching your project, just don't mention COVID. If you want to talk about how you're increasing your farm's resilience to future pandemics, that's great. But the COVID-19 words just might, we just wouldn't want you to get thrown out because they're associating your request with COVID funding requests.
And also, if you have an idea you want to run by us, both my contact and Shannon's contact are in the chat right now. It's on our website. Feel free. We're happy to talk through, help you think about how it might answer some of these questions. If you want to make the effort to go through, this whole grant writing process. Hey, Tish, is that a hand up?
It is. I just had a question related to what you just said about COVID related, but is it just a bad word to even say throughout there? But I mean, we, as you know, Karen, have worked every day since COVID started. And we just want to be able, like, I thought that would be a good thing to hit on, the fact that we did work through COVID with a healthy environment for everyone, and that we're trying to bring healthy food to our community. Is that a bad thing to mention that we're just, we delivered many meals to people that were shut in. I thought that would be a plus, but if not, then obviously it wouldn't be said.
If it ties into your request, you were able to deliver so much during a pandemic to be able to respond to future disruptions, to make our food system more secure. We are proposing to do X, Y, and Z. If it's directly related to how you want to expand or what your project is, I think that's okay.
I just didn't know if that was a dirty word to mention. It's a dirty word in my vocabulary right now, but what I'd say is it's definitely going to help. I think it's going to help in the project that we're planning on.
Yeah.
So to mention.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not what they're trying to differentiate is this is not a COVID response funding opportunity. This is to increase the resilience of our food system through infrastructure investment. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example, because what you're saying is you're demonstrating how important you were to the community during a pandemic, and therefore you're looking to expand what you're doing to continue to be a significant distribution of local food mechanism in your community. So using how you address the pandemic as an example, and then actually getting letters of support from some of those families that you were able to service would be really helpful.
Thank you.
Rose, how appropriate and feasible is this grant for maybe some of our beginning farmers who don't necessarily have an established customer base or an established retail space even? Is that, is this something they can still apply for and reasonably expect to get funded?
They can certainly apply for it. What they would really need to key on is how is their proposed business, because the only problem with proposed business is you have no historical track record to go on. So if you're going to say my proposed business is going to service these communities, then you really want letters of support or letters of commitment saying that if our products are available, these people will actually buy or consume them. So do those communities want the product or service that you're planning to offer them? They will definitely need stronger letters of support than folks who have historical track records to show that they're already servicing the population bases that they're targeting. But yes, the wonderful thing is this grant is not limited. And in fact, they're looking for how are we improving the food system. So new parts of the wheel and spoke are going to be great, but they're going to need you to demonstrate how are you actually going to do what you say you're going to do.
Okay. Any other lingering questions out there? Feel free to just unmute and ask aloud or add something to the chat.
Hi, my name is Jill. I just privately messaged you. I was just listening ahead of time and so on. Uh, Basically, we're just getting things started up and so on. So I obviously wanted to know what to do for the future. As far as greenhouse and aquaponics and that type of thing and so on. We've been working towards setting things up, so to speak, on our farm. For a few years and so on. But as far as getting someone, involved in a little more information, I know we're in Central Mass. I don't know if,
Yeah, I think Mackenzie has gotten off the call, but we will connect you afterwards with the buy local for Central Mass Grown.
yeah,
And
thank you for answering.
Yeah.
Mine. I appreciated
Yeah.
that.
Good. But yeah, I don't know if there's anyone on the call who's got aquaculture experience, but there are resources out there. There's also the Mass Aquaculture Association.
Okay.
If you're working with them at all, but they are also good for startup.
Okay. I mean, right now we have the, it's a startup thing and so on, and we're getting ready, put up the greenhouses and that kind of thing, and it's just a matter of finding out what's out there, kind of thing. And so I figured this would be a good start for at least for the future too.
Definitely. If you could just share your email in a private message with me, I can connect you with some folks tomorrow.
Okay, I appreciate it, Shannon, and you guys did a great job.
Thank you, Jill.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question on the project title? She said to basically, I mean, how long can that project title be? I mean, is there like a limit on where that project title has to? I mean, because my project title's already turned into a 3-sentence.
I would say no more than 1 sentence. Tell us your 3-sentence project title.
Well, I'm looking to purchase a reefer freezer unit to transport our farm raised animals from the processor to the farm, and then we're also putting in a commercial kitchen where we're almost done with that project. But I want to be able to transport healthy meals to the elderly, shut-ins, again, people who have been affected by COVID. So I know you said not to say that, but this is where I'm saying it's fit into the point where we do this a lot, where we just like ring the doorbell and run and drop off meals to these families that are in lockdown. So how do you write that in 1 sentence,
How is the reefer in the kitchen going to help you transport those meals? Are you going to make more meals? Are they going to be less perishable? What is the reefer in the kitchen going to do?
Well, we already have the kitchen is in progress, almost done. We're doing heat and eat meals. So in order to transport a meal, the vehicle would hopefully have some sort of a reefer unit on it, but not just a freezer unit for transporting the meats from the processor back to the farm, but a reefer unit in it where it's one side of it might be just a free refrigerated unit to transport these meals from the farm that have been produced, our farm raised animals and meat, vegetables produced, a meal to transport to these families, elderly, shut-ins, etc. So I'm seeing a longer than 1 line.
Yeah, I think you're going to be tying it directly into what are you using as your transportation now?
Right now, we're just using refrigerated bags to transport them. So I'm putting ice packs in bags and transporting them that way. I mean, we're not traveling across the state. We're traveling within our town and vicinity, local towns, next neighboring towns. So we're not traveling more than a half an hour. But I mean, how delivery people do it? They put it in either a bag to keep it warm or to keep it cold. And that's kind of what we're doing now, but to keep it where if I was to deliver more than one meal, yeah, it might be more than a half an hour on the road.
So we're purchasing a refrigerated vehicle to improve the food safety of local meals to the elderly.
And shut-ins.
Yep. And the reason that you want to include the food safety part is because you already have a mechanism that's working. So they're going to say, but you already have a mechanism that's working. So why does this get elevated above other people's requests? Because your current method is a bit risky in terms of food safety. So yep. And that makes a nice, you've answered everything. What are we trying to do? We're trying to buy this vehicle. Why are we trying to do it? Because we're trying to serve this population and our current method is a bit risky. And that's actually a really strong application. And make sure that it's a new vehicle, because if you ask for a used vehicle, you'll get kicked out. And that's where sometimes it's really important that you're weighing the cost benefit of free money versus just doing your own thing, because the benefit to a grant to buy a new vehicle, if it turns out that if it wasn't for free, this grant, the fact is, as long as it's under $100,000, you don't have to show a match. But if it was a 50-50 match, it might still be worth your while to go buy your used vehicle, because that would be less cash outlay to you than the 50% match to buy something new. In your case, this is no match as long as you stay below the 100,000 threshold, so you should be good.
Sorry, Akari, if that's how you pronounce it, you have your hand up.
Yes. So I am from the organization that offers activities to the adult with intellectual and developmental disability, and we do a farm program. And our project so far, I think this is a third year in. The harvest that we get out of our gardening program, we have been doing a community food pantry project. So basically all those harvests gets donated to the food pantry. So I'm kind of looking at this grant to see if it would be applicable for our type of a pretty small scale project. And sort of different equipment or structure needs we may have. And I don't know if there is any specific things that we may need to be careful about when we are putting together an application, if we are not sort of business, the commercial, farm, applying for this type of project is my one question. And the second question is not quite specifically tied to the grant application just yet, but I am thinking of the sort of next phase of this community food pantry project, because sometimes I do hear even at the food pantry level, they may struggle to distribute all the produce that we drop off fresh. So my head is sort of going to the next phase of potentially project for us. What can we do to be able to, in some ways, a process, even just simple branch and freeze, type of things, so that potentially we can partner with the food pantry to extend the shelf life so that they don't end up wasting the produce that we drop off fresh at the moment. So my sort of second part of the question is, who would be a good person for me to be able to reach out to find out, what is the best way to go about setting up that sort of the next phase of project. And that might also kind of, gives me an idea if this type of grant would also be applicable to be able to, purchase some of the equipment and so on. So it's a sort of two-part question.
I'll take a stab, and then Karen and Shannon can pop in. The project itself sounds great. So you're an organization that's already dealing with a population that the grant is interested in, and the products that you're growing are being donated to the food bank, which is a double hit wonder. So that's fine. The question is going to be more about, is what you're asking money for going to fit the list of eligible expenses? So you really want to make sure that you're asking for capital equipment expenses. And in your case, it might not be a very big ask, because it depends on what, for your initial just growing and getting stuff to the food bank, what extra things do you need? In your case, it sounds like maybe a program manager would be really helpful, but we can't ask for a program manager. So we can't fund staff time, we can't fund operating time. But if you needed a vehicle to transport products from where you're growing it to the food bank, that, for example, would be eligible. The second question, which is related to, they are actually losing product that you grow for them because they can't distribute it as rapidly as its perishability allows, and therefore you're interested in doing some value added sort of production to it. That then becomes that question of, what are the costs that you need? Again, it has to be the infrastructure. So do you need a commercial kitchen? If you were just going to go lease space from an existing commercial kitchen, that's not going to be eligible. So they would actually expect you to either build a kitchen or have a kitchen. And if you have a kitchen, then the things that you would need to be purchasing are like the equipment. So if you're going to be basically just peeling and blanching vegetables, is there an ask there? You could even have a $300 ask for a couple steam kettles. That's fine, but just make sure that the ask is related to the equipment, or the equipment and the build out of a kitchen. Because your entire population base that you're serving is the food bank, even if the build out of the kitchen might sound as compared to the amount of money that you're generating, like we gave that example of a $50,000 business asking for $500,000, the cost to build you a kitchen, given they're not asking for a match, and 100% of the output of that kitchen is going to the food bank, it might be a fairly strong application. So the nice thing about you is that your organization's entire mission of what you're doing with the food fits what they're trying to do with this grant.
I think in terms of, the things I'm thinking of is we have a good number of individuals who can't really get down to the ground easily. So the raised beds table that allows them to be able to, grow the vegetable. We've tried it out in a small scale, and that worked out really great. So, sort of the materials to be able to do that, or we have a rundown old greenhouse that we have not been able to use last couple of seasons. If we can get the new greenhouse, to be able to replace that rundown one, we can certainly increase the sort of the capacity to be able to, grow more produce. So those are probably the items that I'm currently thinking in my head. And in terms of the sort of the second part of the project, I think it either, will be to build the commercial, kitchen, or more of that equipment to be able to sort of cook, process, and sort of the, packaging, not the actual packaging material, but the, with the vacuum packing machine, that type of things, I think might be the line that I'm thinking of. But for the second project, I think I will need a little bit more of the technical assistance, so to speak. As we think about it, what kind of things I need to think about, put in place to be able to actually do that, step for the food pantry. So I don't know if there is any recommendation of who I can reach out to be able to kind of start that, gathering up the informations.
I think it's fine to start with us. You're at New England Village, right? Yeah,
Yes.
that's what I thought. That's the model that I know in the region. So yeah, you're within CMAP's technical assistance area, and we should have a
great.
conversation. Yeah.
I will definitely reach out to you.
Yeah, so we can
Yeah.
connect after the event tomorrow
Great.
or the day after, and we can have a
Okay,
conversation.
great. Thank you.
My pleasure. Good. A question that I received, if you applied previously and have gotten your scores or gotten your reviews, do you in your new proposal address that you had applied before and have improved the grant as they recommended?
I wouldn't normally do that. I would just improve the grant to whatever they've done. I wouldn't necessarily say I applied last time and you didn't fund me, but here's what I've done to improve it. I would just make the improvements.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions?
Thank you all for doing a great job.
Pleasure. We're happy to offer this. We're excited to have this much funding potential for farms and, across the state, but especially in the CMAP region. So if you are in Bristol, Plymouth, and Norfolk County, and sorry, here comes my lump of cat. If you're in Bristol, Plymouth, and Norfolk County, we can provide direct technical assistance up to our capacity to handle this, a certain number of grants. We encourage you to reach out if you think you want to work with us. We have a business assistance form, but we're also available by phone and text, which is in the chat. And as we had said earlier, the notes will come out from this workshop, the recording will come out from the workshop, and we are here to write letters of support, to help you strategize, to review grants.
Yes, thank you all so much for coming. I'm hoping that it was really helpful for FSIG, but also, like I said, for grants going forward. And we're definitely crossing our fingers for all of you. But if there's anything we can do in addition to crossing our fingers, please do let us know. We're eager to help.
And thank you very much, Rose, for your time tonight. We appreciate
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Thank you, Rose.
Available.
Awesome. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you, Ian.
Welcome.
Thank
Good
you.
luck, everybody.
Everyone have a good night.
You
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye-bye. I'm going to
Yeah, I'll work on
stop
one.
the recording.
Good.